and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This meeting of the Honourable Senate for Friday, the 13th of May, 2022, is called to order. Before we begin the business of the day, a couple of matters to deal with. First of all, we wish to seek the permission of the Senate for two of our members to join virtually. Senator Allen and Senator Campbell. So with your permission, I authorize them to participate virtually in the Senate. Thank you very much. And secondly, I wish to ask Ms. Colleen Lowe to just stand up. Ms. Lowe is the new Deputy Clerk. She is an attorney at law with over 10 years experience, having been called to the Jamaican Bar in 2014 and in fact was called to Lincoln's Inn in London in 2012. She had experience here in Jamaica at the National Land Authority and would have been known to both Mr. Bunting and I as the legal officer at the Electoral Commission of Jamaica for many years. So we welcome her as the new Deputy Clerk. And of course, in doing so, I thank all the members of the staff at the Parliament who were doubling up and covering for the role of Deputy Clerk, especially Ms. Cohen. Thank you for your service to the Parliament. With us today in the gallery are students and teachers from the Jacks Hill Primary and Infant School here in St. Andrew. So we want to welcome you to the Senate. And trust that you will enjoy your stay with us. I think when you leave here, you're going to the National Gallery. I'm sure that you will enjoy your time down there even more. So, welcome. Now, well, since last we met, and it is quite current that we, as a nation, have suffered the loss of, well, several persons, but in particular, 3 Jamaicans that I wish to just mention briefly and ask that the clerk write accordingly to indicate that we had made reference to their passing. I would ask that the clerk writes to the family of the Honourable Barbara Glutens, OJ, and to the family of Mr. Christopher Armand. Both of them were involved in journalism of one sort or another and were in the public space, especially Mrs. Glutens, who really became a household name in Jamaica in her capacity as a journalist, talk show host. Well, I of course will remember her for her contribution specifically to the Institute of Jamaica and to the National Gallery of Jamaica. And Mr. Ahmad, of course, was well known in the area of the racehorse fraternity, of which I couldn't help but notice that one of our colleagues was successful recently. That is to say, Mr. Don Webby, whose horse Atomics apparently won some important race out there. I don't know anything about racehorse, let me just tell you from now. So we asked that, and you know, it is the nature of things that Mr. Gluten had passed a short while before Barbara. I'm sure that the family must be going through some difficult times, and I would ask that, Madam Clerk, you write to both. On a similar but different note, former Senator Mr. Paul Christopher Miller passed recently as well, and we pay tribute to Mr. Miller, who served 2 terms in the Senate from 1972 to 1980. Mr. Miller served as Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Youth and Community Development, and later as Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Justice. Mr. Miller was a genial, and despite his unassuming manner, or perhaps because of it, was able to accomplish much during his tenure as a senator and in the Parliament. We appreciate his service to Jamaica. We express our deepest condolences to his widow, children, and to the other members of his family. I will take tribute in relation to Mr. Miller, and if you wish, the other persons who I had mentioned, at the end of which I will ask for a moment's silence in relation to Senator Miller, as is the usual custom in the passing of one of our number. I'm going to ask Senator Bunting, Senator Scott Motley, I'm going to ask to respond, and then I believe Senator, respond to what I have said. And then I'm going to ask Senator Rodriguez Campbell.
Mr. President, I join in the sentiments which you have expressed as the President of the Senate. The Gordontown community, to which I belong, has suffered a great loss. First with the loss of Ansel Gluten, and now with the loss of Mrs. Barbara Gluten. When I wrote a tribute to her on Facebook, I think I expressed my deepest sentiment. It is difficult to play a tribute to a woman who has played such monumental roles and who is so multifaceted: a journalist, a producer, a theater personality, and someone who was hotline, became the voice and the soul of the nation. We, here on this side, express our condolences to the family at the tremendous loss that they are experiencing, because Ansel passed 12 days before his dear wife. But the years that they had spent together, and husband and wife, it is almost, and you will forgive me, Mr. President, for putting it this way, fitting that having lived their entire life together, that they go together. They loved each other, and now at least they are together. Mr. President, we have lost so many people this week alone. Mr. Trevor Nairn, who is well known as a theater personality, and for whom encomiums have been heard all across the sphere of theater, just people acknowledging his ability, his talent, and his goodness. and then Chris Armon. I'm not really a racehorse fan, but he was outstanding. His commentary was so compelling that you had to listen to it. He had that kind of voice that made you just get caught up in the race itself. And it was so good to hear last night, sports news, as they rebroadcast some of his outstanding commentaries. You felt like you were actually watching the race all over again. And again, I extend the condolences of the Senate, the opposition senators here. I take a little longer for Paul Miller because he was a senator, and it is the custom that we speak to the senators, persons who have served in this House. Paul Miller was a member of the People's National Party, and he was almost a very shy person, but he had a great impact on the party. He is best known for his support of young people, and he launched his political career advocating for the youth. He was the General Secretary of the Jamaica Youth Council and led island-wide protests and campaigned to protect the rights of young people to vote. You might not recall, Mr. President, but in the 1972 election, the way in which the list was organized, young people who were 24 were disenfranchised from voting, even though the voting age was then 21. And Paul led this tremendous advocacy to get those young people to be on the voting list. He was also instrumental to the establishment of the International Student Exchange Program, which provides the opportunity for Jamaican students to benefit from a program of work and study in other countries, as well as the strengthening of local student councils across the island. As you have said, Mr. President, he served as a member of the Senate and as Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Youth and Community Development, and became the driving force behind the National Youth Service Program. And that is when I met him as a student at Clarendon College, when he actually came to present on the National Youth Service Program. And I can say now, because it's such a long time ago, that as a head girl then, I listened very carefully, having welcomed the persons making the presentation to Clarendon College. But I did tell him that it was an excellent program, but it was not ready to be launched. And I advised him that he should go back, flesh out the program, and then hit the road with it. Because after a certain line of questioning, I knew that there were issues which remained. And Paul was always so very generous and kind and attentive to me when he met me subsequently to that, as he would, I being a member of the PNP-YO. It is just Paul that he would have taken no offense, but in fact sought to embrace me as a result of the observations which I made. Under his leadership, because he was so focused on the youth, the enrollment of people in youth training centers island-wide doubled, and his work is on record. He never retired from nation building. He just built in different areas, and he was a devout member of the church. But, Mr. President, if you know him, I think the lasting testimony to him is that he was such a good family man, always surrounded by his family. A friend of mine called me a couple of weeks ago when he was visiting her, and he was visiting with the grandchildren, and was just so pleased that they wanted to spend time with him in what he called was the bush, because they reside overseas. He was a good, decent man. There's nobody who can speak ill of him as a politician, and that is commendable, because in this sort of divisive space, you'll find people having something negative to say no matter what you do. I think that he would want to be remembered as someone who always served as someone who tried to live a life of example. We extend our condolences to his wife, Cameron, to his daughter, Onika, his son, Shaka, and Kwame. And may he rest in peace, if it pleases you.
Thank you, Senator Scott Motley. Senator Rodriguez.
Mr. President, thank you. I stand to join with what you have said, along with my colleague, Senator, about the glutens and Paul Miller. You know, I basically grew up listening to Mr. Gluten on the radio. I think those of us in my age group, we think of her when we think of Hotline, even today. And it says a lot even when someone has left a position, when you think of something that they did before, you still think of them in that position. And Ms. Gluten was one of those persons, whether or not you agreed with the positions she took, you had to respect the way she was fervent and determined to get her positions across. And outside of that, I grew up with pantomime, and I've often said, this is one of the things my children have not gotten the chance to know, is pantomime in Jamaica. The Ward Theatre is still special to me in my heart, and Ms. Gluten contributed to Jamaica with her writing for the pantomime and her book, Moonshine and Nancy. I think those are things that we need to keep alive, and Mr. President, as someone in the arts, I do think we need to ensure that Moonshine and Nancy and the 29 scripts that she wrote for the national pantomime be kept as treasures in Jamaica. But funnily enough, you know, sometimes you delay, and they say delay is danger. I'm new to the world of orchids, but I've fallen in love. COVID has done that, where it made me fall in love with orchids. And her husband, who is considered orchid hunter extraordinaire, he has written 2 books on orchids that are native to Jamaica. And I've been trying on Amazon to get these 2 books, and I'm told they're out of stock. I made a note that I need to contact him to see if I could get a copy, maybe from his private stock. And now he is no more. And that's another piece of work, because he's the only one who has researched extensively local orchids. And now his books are out of stock and he's no more. So Senator Scott Motley, maybe that's something you could help us orchid lovers with to some extent. So may their souls rest in peace, and may their families find ways to ensure that their legacies keep going. Paul Miller, former senator. It is so funny because when I served as Jamaica's Director of Youth, when the youth department was under the Ministry of Local Government and Minister Arnold Bertram at the time, when I just went into the ministry to work in the youth department, I wondered why this man, Paul Miller, was always there, because I didn't know of him. And, you know, you're a little bit skeptical. But over the years where I worked as Director of Youth, I realized that he was someone who was concerned about not just nation building, but specifically youth development. And when you speak to persons who worked with or socialized with Paul Miller, one of the things that you often hear is that he was kind, he was considerate, and he was always pleasant. He had a quiet disposition when talking about certain issues that you would often underestimate the mind that was behind a lot of what he got done. And also he was very critical in revitalizing both the SDC and the NYS in the early 2000s. So I just want to express, Mr. President, our thanks to this former senator for the work that he has done, and just say to his family, especially his widow and children, as well as the extended family, that we're grateful for them having shared him with us here in Jamaica, and to say thank you for all that he has contributed to our beautiful island of Jamaica. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, and in keeping with our custom, I'm going to ask you to rise and reflect on the life of former Senator Paul Miller. May his soul rest in peace and light perpetual shine upon him. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Ministry Paper number 34 of 2022, entitled The Proposed National School Nutrition Policy, and Green Paper number 1 of 2022, entitled National School Nutrition Policy. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Norman Manley International Airport Limited for the years 2018, 2019, and 2019, 2020. Annual report on audited financial statement of the Montego Bay Metro Company Limited for the year 2010-2011. Annual report of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security for the year 2020-2021, and statistical bulletin for the years 2020 and 2021. Annual report on audited financial statement of the Transport Authority for the year 2018-2019. Annual report of the Scientific Research Council for the year 2020-2021. Annual report of the Tourism Enhancement Fund for the year 2020-2021. Annual report of the Jamaica Tourist Board for the year 2018-2019. Highlights of the key initiatives 2021-2022 from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. COVID-19 at a glance, using data prepared as at April 24, 2022, from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Vitals, a quarterly report of the Ministry of Health and Wellness dated April 2022. Primary health care reform for Jamaica 2021 to 2030. The Integrity Commission investigation into the failure of a Member of Parliament to file statutory declarations with the Commission. The Customs Tariff Revision Amendment Resolution 2022 under the Customs Act. The Conch Export Levy, Rate of Levy Order 2022 and its resolution. Reports of the Regulation Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on 1. The Radio and Telegraph Control Amateur Radio Service Amendment Regulations 22. 2. The Radio and Telegraph Control Citizen Band Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022. 3. The Radio and Telegraph Control Maritime Mobile Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022. 4. The Radio and Telegraph Control Private Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022, and the Radio and Telegraph Control Radio Operators and Technicians Amendment Regulations 2022.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives, petitions, papers, reports from committees.
Mr. President,
Senator Brown.
I beg to lay on the table of the Senate reports of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Maritime Mobile Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022. Report of Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Amateur Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022. Report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Citizen Band Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022. Report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Radio Operators and Technicians Amendment Regulations 2022. Report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Private Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move, and of course you know what they are, but I will go through them. Be it resolved that the report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Maritime Mobile Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th day of May, be approved. Be it resolved that report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Amateur Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th day of May, be approved. 3. Be it resolved that report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Citizen Band Radio Service Amendment Regulation 2022, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th of May 2022, be approved. Be it resolved that report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Radio Operators and Technicians Amendment Regulations, which was laid on the table Mr. President, be it resolved that report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Radio Operators and Technicians Amendment Regulations 2022, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th day of May 2022, be approved. Be it resolved that report of the Regulations Committee of the Honourable Senate on its deliberations on the Radio and Telegraph Control Private Radio Service Amendment Regulations 2022, which was laid on the table of the Senate on the 13th of May 2022, be approved. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take these motions.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice? Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate? Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Mr. President, I now move for the suspension. Twice. No? Okay.
You're planning to take his motion and then his resolution and then
Mr. President, I seek your permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
Thank you, Senator Hill. Thank you, Minister Hill.
The Senate will seek to take the two motions, one presented by Senator Braham, and I know one is going to be presented by Senator Morris, and I look forward for those to go forward, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. Senator Braham.
I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor? Against?
Mr. President, the regulations that I have read earlier, all 5 of them, I commend to the Senate. The Regulations Committee met, Mr. President, along with the technical team from the ministry responsible, Mr. President, and the Spectrum Management Authority to review these regulations. Citizens Band Regulation and Amateur Radio Service Regulation, Mr. President, that dealt with, in terms of the amendment, the license tenure under both regulations, which was increased from 1 to 5 years, Mr. President. It was indicated that in light of the value of the licenses, the purpose for which they are used, and the regulatory effort involved in issuing an annual license, it will be more efficient to grant a longer validity period. With respect to the Maritime Mobile Radio Service Regulation, Mr. President, 2 new periods of validity of 6 months and 4 years were added in relation to international ships. The committee was informed that the application on behalf of international ships are made through the Jamaica Ship Registry, which is administered by the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, which pursuant to the Shipping Act requires provisional registration of a ship and thereafter permanent registration. Accordingly, the tenure of the spectrum license for these vessels have been tailored accordingly for administrative ease. In relation to private radio service regulations, Mr. President, the principal regulations only provided for the issuance of annual licenses, which were found to be very restrictive and could impede the efficient regulation of the spectrum. Therefore, the regulations propose to provide for additional periods of validity, catering to all the categories of services captured under the heading of private radio service, in particular, licenses for backhaul spectrum, which supports mobile services. As a result of the new periods of validity, it was also necessary to make amendments to reflect that the fees for a license, with the exception of a 3-month license, are payable annually regardless of the duration of the license. New fees or algorithms were included for services which did not exist at the time the principal regulations were enacted, such as lower power FM broadcasting, mobile subscriber TV services, and duplex pair point to multi-point links. and fees were decreased for some service categories, which, due to the evolution of technology, utilizes the spectrum more efficiently and or smaller portion of the spectrum. With respect to the radio operators and technicians regulations, the fees for operators' certificate and radio technicians' license were updated. Monetary penalties and custodial sentences were increased in relation to all the regulations, having considered other recent legislative amendments treating with similar subject matters, such as failure to hold a license and breach of secrecy obligations, and the overall objective of deterring unauthorized use of the spectrum. The offenses addressed related to the use of the spectrum without a valid license, failing to produce a valid license upon request, failing to comply with the obligation of secrecy in relation to a license. Additionally, Mr. President, the fine in the catch-all provision treating with breaches which are not specifically penalized under the regulations was increased. After careful consideration and deliberation, Mr. President, the committee had no objections to any of the 5 regulations as tabled. Accordingly, Mr. President, I ask that the 5 reports regarding these regulations be approved by this Honourable Senate. And Mr. President, different. Mr. President, just to add, before I take my seat, that it was a most interesting learning experience for somebody who had no particular knowledge of this area, and also to discover that there is a very significant amount of Jamaicans who are involved in amateur radio services, and that the society and the authorities actually depend on them in time of emergency and in times where we have storms or otherwise, to relay information as to incidents as they happen in the country, which enable the emergency services to respond. Mr. President, the team from the Ministry and the Spectrum Authority was very helpful in guiding the committee and responding to the questions. And of course, Mr. President, the committee is grateful to them. Thank you, Mr. President, and I commend the motion to the members.
Thank you, Senator Braham. Senator Fraser-Binns.
Mr. President, on our part, we want to say that we actually stand in support of the motion before us. In fact, being a member of the committee, I can give full support to the closing comments of Chairman Senator Braham. When we first commenced the deliberations, I mean, the first thing that hit us, Chairman, you may recall, were the fines and what we deem in some instances the rather high increases, drastic increases that were being proposed. And this led to a series of questions, and out of that we really came to understand the importance of this industry. And it is an industry that we don't really know a lot about, but it is so very important to the society. Yeah, well, so for example, those of us who take taxis and we hear them talking from time to time, and we hear the office maybe calling and say they need a taxi for somewhere, we will not even understand the importance of that line of communication, but more so the importance of not breaching that line of communication because of the effects it can have. There are security effects, security implications. I remember they shared with us the security companies as well, that they also use that means. And it was really a very informative and eye-opening experience, and perhaps one of the more enjoyable experiences I've had sitting on a committee. And like Senator Braham, and I see Senator Golden Campbell, who also sat on the committee, it was very probing. The chairman made it very lively and inclusive, and we commend him for his style. Yes, Chairman, Senator. but all being said, Chairman, we really want to commend the technical team, because led by CTD, they clearly have a good understanding of what they do, and were able to share with us so we too could understand and give support to the bill. And with that being said, we on this side give our full support to the motion before us.
Yes, Senator Braham.
Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier. Sorry, Mr. President, I think I have gone backwards.
Those in favor? Having heard that, those in favor?
Yes.
Those against?
No, it is the right thing, Mr. President. It's the right thing, according to my running order. According to my running order, Mr. President. And so, Mr. President, I move that the motion be accepted. It's like a practice, Mr. President.
That's all right. And the practice and the run-up is always good.
Thank you.
Colleagues, those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Motions approved. Leader? And now we have the second motion on the other paper. Senator Morris.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to participate and to lead out in this very special debate on a motion moved by me. But before I do so, Mr. President, I must say, I had two pictures that I wanted to show today. But I understand from the technical people, the technical staff, that it wouldn't be possible to share it because there are other senators who are actually online. But I just want to indicate that I had a picture of myself and the Honourable Barbara Glutens at our wedding in 2011.
Senator Morris, in case you don't know, that photograph is on the front page of the newspaper today.
It was brought to my attention, Mr. President. And, Mrs. Glutens and I had a very special relationship because when I came into Kingston in 1991, I had some problems with getting my exams done in an accessible format at the Overseas Examinations Office. And Mrs. Glutens intervened and assisted in solving that problem. And from then, we have had a very good relationship. And her husband is also my church brother, Ansel. And so I know them very well. And I want to express my profound condolences to the family. Also, Mr. President, 2 Wednesdays ago, I had one of the most pleasurable days of my life in recent times because there was a reunion of myself and 2 childhood friends who date back to primary school, Colin Davis and Richard Creary, who we went to primary school together. Richard Creary is the current mayor of Port Maria. and we traveled to Manchester together to visit our 106-year-old primary school teacher, 106 years old, Miss Daisy Morgan of Patrick in central Manchester. And in moving my motion, I want to salute Miss Daisy Morgan, who served in the education system and particularly Portmore Primary School for over 40 years and has produced some outstanding students who have been contributing to national and regional development. I speak of Colonel Daniel Price, who currently heads the Island Traffic Authority. I speak of Mayor Richard Creary, who is the Mayor of Port Maria. And I also speak of Mr. James Adams, who is the former captain of the West Indies cricket team, all who came under her guidance. And so she has had a profound impact on my life, and I want to dedicate this motion to her. Mr. President, the motion standing in my name reads as follows. Whereas Jamaica is a rapidly aging society with senior citizens constituting the critical mass of the population, and whereas estimates suggest that over 350,000 individuals representing 13.2% of the population can be classified as senior citizens, and whereas these individuals are regarded as vulnerable citizens, and whereas these individuals have toiled and labored for Jamaica, and whereas these individuals deserve to be treated with care, respect, and gratitude, and whereas we have seen from time to time the disregard, disrespect, and neglect of these individuals by family members, and whereas there is an urgent need to protect these vulnerable citizens, and whereas there is no specific legislation to protect the rights and the dignity of senior citizens, be it resolved that this Honourable Senate call upon the government to establish specific legislation in the form of an Elderly Care and Protection Act to protect senior citizens, and be it resolved that a special select committee of the Senate be established to deliberate on the scope and magnitude of this legislation to be formulated. Mr. President, I am really delighted at once again called upon to move a motion of this magnitude in the Honorable Chamber. Once again, I'm championing the cause of another vulnerable group in Jamaica. In this conspectus, Mr. President, I will present some arguments as to why it is absolutely necessary to establish specific legislation to protect our senior citizens. Therefore, in my arguments, I will give an overview of the current situation of senior citizens in Jamaica, some of the challenges confronting senior citizens in the island, some of the responses to the challenges confronting senior citizens locally and internationally, and the legislative response to senior citizens in the Caribbean and the broader Commonwealth. I will also highlight the national imperative for Jamaica where senior citizens are concerned. Just give me a moment, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are going through currently a demographic transition where senior citizens are concerned. And the data is pointing globally to significant shifts, significant changes in terms of the population of senior citizens. According to the United Nations, there are over 962 million individuals over the age of 60 living across the world. This is approximately 13% of the global population. We are having a rapidly aging population globally, as estimates point to approximately 480 million individuals in the over 80 category by 2050. The annual growth of the senior citizens population is 3%. These data have profound implications for global development. In Jamaica, Mr. President, the 60-plus age cohort is the fastest growing segment of the population. In 2011, the population and housing census for Jamaica estimated population of those aged 60 years, 325,000 plus, constituting 99% of the population, compared to 10.1% in the 2001 census. According to the Economic and Social Survey in 2015, the cohort numbered over 341,000, which is over 12% of the population. Mr. President, the senior citizens population are confronted with a number of challenges in Jamaica. Chief among these are, we have the situation of their health. In 2012, Professor Denise Eldemire Shearer conducted a situation analysis on the population of senior citizens in Jamaica. And, Mr. President, I have to pause and salute the most honorable Denise Eldemire Shearer, because she has dedicated all her life to working with senior citizens and conducting research on this vulnerable population. The situation analysis revealed that the incidence of illness was greater among the elderly in the general population, and that about 72% of the elderly reported at least one chronic illness. Approximately 50% have comorbidities, and 61% reported taking at least one medication. The elderly population is impacted by high levels of undiagnosed and poorly controlled disease. And so, Mr. President, there is an urgency to make sure that we put in protective measures for these individuals. Mr. President, there is a critical intersectionality between aging and disability, because as one grows older, the possibility of developing a disabling condition increases. According to local data, about 15% of the older population reporting having a disability. The most common one being physical disability, 30%. The rate of disability was higher among males than females and increased with age. A significant proportion of persons in a significant portion of persons indicated that they have at least one disability during their older years. So, Mr. President, it is anticipated that as one goes older, it is a possibility that you can develop a disabling condition. And I want to point out, Mr. President, that one growing disability that is emerging, that is of concern to me and should be of concern to the nation, is that of dementia. Is that of dementia. It is a profound neurological, it has a profound neurological impact on the body. And I remember in 1981, 82, thereabout, my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. At the time, we knew very little about the disease. Lo and behold, as I scanned through my community in Baileysville today, I can readily identify at least 4 individuals, senior citizens, who I know have some form of disabling condition caused by dementia. So, Mr. President, it is a concern to me, because when individuals in their family have to care for these individuals, they do not understand the gravamen of the problem, and oftentimes they end up abusing their family member. And this, Mr. President, is something that is a violation of the rights of these senior citizens, and is something that we have to address in order to make sure that the citizens are given adequate protection. Mr. President, based on the data presented earlier, there have been various responses locally, regionally, and internationally to deal with the various challenges confronting our senior citizens. One popular one is the Madrid International Plan of Action. The Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging and its political declaration, Madrid plan were adopted in April 2002 by the 153 countries which attended the session at the World Assembly on Aging in Madrid. The Madrid Plan emphasizes a crucial role of government in promoting, providing, and ensuring access to basic social services, bearing in mind specific needs of older persons. It fully recognizes the rights of older persons, contribution of older persons, and draws attention to the need for action on aging worldwide. In line with the central concept of a society for all ages. That is what the Madrid Plan is about. The three priority areas coming out of the Madrid Plan are: 1, older persons and development; 2, advancing health and well-being into old age; and 3, ensuring a supportive, enabling environment. At the Second World Assembly on Aging in Madrid, countries committed themselves to eliminating all forms of discrimination, in particular age discrimination, to ensure that persons, as they age, enjoy a life of fulfillment, health, security, and active participation in the economic, social, cultural, and political life of their societies. So, based on the Madrid Plan, there has been a national response. And as I tell you, when it comes on to aging matters, Jamaica has been in the forefront of it, and you would expect that once Denise Eldemeyer Shearer is around. Jamaica has been a trailblazer in developing the national policy for senior citizens, one of the very first to have been done in the Latin America and Caribbean region. And here, Mr. President, I want to take this opportunity to also salute former Minister of Labor and Social Security and former Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honourable Portia Simpson Miller, because it was when she was Minister of Labor and Social Security that the national policy for senior citizens was formulated in 1997. The 1997 national policy for senior citizens was based on the 1982 Vienna International Plan of Action on Aging and recommendation on several international meetings came about in the 1990s, including the Beijing Conference and the Social Summit in Denmark. So, Mr. President, as I point out to you, we have been a trailblazer in terms of putting forward the national policy for senior citizens. In Jamaica, the National Council for Senior Citizens have the primary responsibility for ensuring that the national policy effectively promote the priorities of key international declarations such as the 2013 Montevideo Consensus, the 2012 San Jose Charter, and the 2007 Brasilia Declaration, which propose a regional strategy towards implementation of the 2002 Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. The National Council for Senior Citizens keep focus on policy, pardon me, Mr. President. The National Policy for Senior Citizens keep focus on how the policy facilitates the rights of older persons, meets the standards outlined in 3 focus areas of the Madrid International Plan of Action, which I have highlighted earlier. Mr. President, what has been and what is the vision for senior citizens in Jamaica? The vision for senior citizens in Jamaica is for senior citizens to live and participate actively in a society that guarantees their rights, promotes their responsibilities, recognizes their capabilities and contributions, and facilitates their enjoyment of a life of fulfillment, health and security in the Jamaican society. Have we been doing that, Mr. President? One might ask. And I want to say, Mr. President, it disturbs me that from time to time we would listen to the news and we would hear of the various challenges that senior citizens have been encountering. They have been scammed by family members. They have been abused by family members. And they have difficulties in collecting the pension that they have so long worked hard and toiled for in this country. And Mr. President, as I mentioned pension, I want to pause for a cause and call upon the Honourable Minister of Labour and Social Security to place under active review and increase the pension for the NIS members, because the pension that is being paid to senior citizens needs an increase in light of the inflationary pressures that are taking place in the society today. So I repeat, Mr. President, that there needs to be an urgent increase in the pension that is paid to the pensioners on the NIS. And I ask the Honourable Minister to make sure that due consideration is given to that. Mr. President, in 2015, countries across the world signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals, and Jamaica is a signatory to those agreements. And there is an intimate link between the Sustainable Development Goal and our senior citizens. The Sustainable Development Goals promise to leave no one behind, thereby ensuring that the needs of all sectors of society at all ages, with a focus on the most vulnerable, including older persons, are met. The national policy seeks to support the country's effort to achieve the SDGs, including those relating to the recognition of older persons, their individual agency, and contribution to society, acknowledgement of their human rights, and access to services such as health, care, transport, and housing. And Mr. President, here I want to point to some of the critical areas that any legislation that is being formulated to protect senior citizens will have to address. Because as it relates to health care, care for the individuals, senior citizens, public transportation and housing, as it relates to their pension, these are individuals that we have to address in any piece of legislation. The goals of the National Policy for Senior Citizens have been revised, and we have a new white paper for senior citizens. And this has established 6 major policy goals, expected outcome. These are: Goal 1, increase participation of senior citizens in all spheres of the society. Goal 2, improve income security and social protection for senior citizens. Goal 3, adequate and supportive health and wellness systems for senior citizens. Goal 4, improve independence, security, and safety for senior citizens. Goal 5, enhance family support systems and community solidarity for interaction with senior citizens. And Goal 6, strengthen institutional and infrastructural collaboration, government, and advocacy. Mr. President, these goals cover the gamut of issues affecting our senior citizens. And I want to strongly suggest that whilst the national policy has outlined the goals, it is not just sufficient for us to have a national policy. We need to transition from that to legislation. In capturing the stated goals, there are 6 thematic areas that have been defined for the national policy for senior citizens. The government and its partners, along with input and participation of senior citizens or their organizations. These are the following 6 thematic areas. 1, social engagement and participation. 2, social protection, income security and employment, health and wellness. 3, physical environment, protection and safety. 4, family integration and intergenerational transfers. 5, government and capacity building. Government and capacity building. Mr. President, as I combed through the national policy or the white paper for the national policy, I recognize that it is a very good document in keeping with the fine tradition that we have established in formulating national policies for our senior citizens. But as I combed through the policy, I realized that there is no provision for specific legislation to protect our senior citizens. There is a need, Mr. President, for the legislation to be established to protect our senior citizens based on the multiplicity of challenges confronting our senior citizens. Our population is aging rapidly, and these individuals are living longer. Consequently, they are vulnerable to a multiplicity of diseases and challenges. And we have to correct these issues in order to facilitate their meaningful development in the Jamaican society. I mentioned earlier about the situation of dementia, which I have to keep on flagging, because when I was talking to some of my colleagues at the university over the past 2 days, that kept on coming back to the conversation, Senator Hill, as a clear and present danger. And we have to make sure that we put in place the necessary measures in order to deal with that particular issue. We have to advance the research where these health conditions for senior citizens are concerned, and more monies have to be injected in conducting research on some of these diseases that are impacting on our senior citizens for a greater understanding, because the research is going to fashion the treatment and response that is provided for our senior citizens. Mr. President, as I looked across the Commonwealth and the Caribbean, I am forced to take note that there are a number of countries across the Commonwealth and in the Caribbean that have been developing legislation to protect our senior citizens. In the broader Commonwealth, you have Mozambique, and you have Australia, and you have South Africa that have legislation. In the Caribbean, we have Trinidad and Tobago that have specific legislation to protect our senior citizens, to protect their senior citizens. And currently, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they are developing legislation to protect their senior citizens. It is recognized, Mr. President, globally, regionally, that as we race towards 2030, and within the next, by 2050, you're going to have a significant population of senior citizens. And in Jamaica in particular, we are having this aging population. And they are, as the society ages, there are challenges that these individuals have to face. And we have to improve the services that are available to these individuals. I am very proud that, you know, the administration that I've been a part of in the past have put in place a number of programs and policies. You know, I remember the Drugs for the Elderly program that was established in the 1990s. I remember when I was Minister of State in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Myself and Horace Daly, who was the senior minister then, had established the NI Gold, which is an additional support mechanism under the NIS program for senior citizens. And then we implemented the PATH program in 2002. And coincidentally, this year, PATH is celebrating its 20th anniversary. And the senior citizens are one of the major beneficiaries under the, the PATH program. And I have to commend the government in terms of recently establishing the social pension program for our senior citizens as well. Mr. President, in 2003, whilst I was Minister of State as well, we introduced the Senior Citizens Games, which saw senior citizens participating in various sporting activities from across the island. So there are a number of programs that have been established, but there are more that needs to be done in that regard. And critical to this is the establishment of a legislative framework to ensure that the senior citizens of our country, those individuals, Senator Braham, who have worked long and hard and toiled and labored for our country, needs to be protected, because it galls me, Mr. President, every time I listen to the news and I hear of the abuse that is being meted out to our senior citizens by individuals in the society. And it is a sick society that engages in such abuse of the older population. And I want us to establish strong legislation to protect these individuals, because they are vulnerable, and we must ensure that we protect all the vulnerable groups within our population, and legislation is critical to this. I am happy that in 1998 I was a part of the Joint Select Committee that looked at the establishment of the Child Care and Protection Act, and also in 2004 initiated the formulation of the Disabilities Act, which we passed whilst I was in the chair that you are now seated, Mr. President, in 2014. I'm very happy that the government has finally implemented that legislation in 2022. But, Senator Braham, I am on to another task. We must put in place legislation to protect our senior citizens. And 1 minute, I'm wrapping up in my last sentence.
Mr. President, given that the Speaker's time has elapsed, I'm asking that the Senate extend the time for him to speak until he's completed.
Thank you very much. You know, Senator Morris, I thought you were just about to move on. I thought you were changing gear. I didn't realize you were gearing down. The question is, you have heard it. Those in favor? Thank you very much. Sorry to have interrupted you, Senator Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And as I rise, I shall take my seat and say, may it please you, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. You see, he was gearing down, not gearing up. Thank you, Dr. Morris, Senator Dr. Morris. Thank you, Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to this very significant private member's motion raised by Senator Dr. Floyd Morris. And I would like to just extend my personal thanks to Senator Morris for all the advocacy that he has championed in so many spheres. And every time I hear Senator Morris speak and I recognize, I don't see him in the group category as being disabled. I always recognize him as being otherwise enabled, and maybe even more so than some of us. And so, again, Senator Morris, I congratulate you and I thank you on behalf of the very vulnerable groups that you have championed for. Mr. President, I also, from the outset, would like to thank the past Prime Minister, Most Honourable Portia Simpson Miller, for the significant contribution that she has made to this agenda. And of course, our late Minister, the Honourable Shahini Robinson, who also significantly championed the cause of our elderly. You mentioned Professor Eldemire Shero, Senator Morrison, and I always, Professor Shero was one of my supervisors for my thesis. And if there is someone you need to guide you and to see to full execution, it was one of the reasons why I sought her advice when I was doing my thesis, because I knew that I would be guided well, and she is so very capable in terms of her provisions for the elderly. I must congratulate and thank her too. Mr. President, I rarely ever admit envy. I'm not an envious person. I was raised to be satisfied with what I have in life. But I would openly admit that I'm envious of persons who have their grandparents in their lives. I see it, I value it, I envy it, I wish I had it, and I think that is a reflection of the value that we pay to our elderly persons when we see the affection that is oftentimes meted out to the elders in our own families. And we in this chamber are the caregivers for our entire nation, and as such, it is fulsome that we seek to see to the care of our elderly population. You know, I'll take it from my personal professional perspective and go give a little technicality with the Erickson stages of development. And for the age span of the elderly, Erickson described it as being generativity versus stagnation. And what that means is that the elderly age group is a stage where we are contemplative as human beings as to what we have contributed to our society and to those around us. That's the generativity part of it. And that's the positive side. The negative side is stagnation, where you feel that you have stagnated, that you have not accomplished, that you have not contributed, that you are at a standstill. It is also where, when we are also considering our mortality. And for these reasons, not just because of the social issues, but the mental issues predisposes us and predisposes that population to significant vulnerability. And so we must plan. You know, when we say prevention is better than cure, if ever there was a time in life when that applies, it is especially then. And the further extension of prevention is better than cure, for me, is preparation is the best prevention. And so when we seek to prepare for our elder years, it goes a far way in preventing us to have to cure situations that might arise. You know, one of the things that, and Senator Morris reflected on some of the regional and international approaches caring for the elderly. But one of the things that I would also want to bring to our awareness is our cultural attitude to the elderly. And I always say that, you know, Jamaica, out of many one people, we tend to somewhat not appreciate what we can adapt from other cultures into our own. And just to say, at one time in my past life, I had a Chinese roommate, a roommate who was Chinese. And because of that, I was kind of exposed to a little bit more of the Chinese culture than most others. And I always admired that there were certain days of the week or certain times that I would come home and I asked, her name was Lucy, I was like, where's Lucy? And Lucy was not at home with us because Lucy it was a special holiday within her family, because on that day, it was her great-grandmother's birthday. Great-grandmother wasn't alive in no way. You're talking about 2-3 generations ago. It was her grand-uncle's birthday, and so she was with her family. It was her grandfather's birthday, and that was even a bigger celebration because he was present. But the principle was there was a celebration of the generativity. There was a celebration of the forefathers within the same family structure. And I found that was such a cultural practice of admiration that wherever I can encourage it. Some of us in this room, we don't even know when probably our great-grandfathers were born, if we even know probably the full name of our great-grandparents. We might be aware of our grandparents. But the point is that there is a value that is inherent within the structure to these individuals who were before us. And therein lies, I think, many lessons that we can adapt and learn. And so, Mr. President, with that preamble, I just want to go a little bit too into the specifics, When I care about something, I do get into it, Senator Brown. Into the specifics of Jamaica's demographic profile as it relates to the elderly. And Senator Morris did give some insight, but I would also would want to add that, as we all know, that the population is divided into three major groups in terms of age. You have the children 0 to 14, the working age population 15 to 64, and the dependent elderly group 65 and over. Now, the pattern of change of the population reflects that we're having a declining child population, and we're also at the same time having an expansion of our working population and, of course, our elderly population. The two major implications of that sustained decline in child population are, one, that you'll have a reduction in total fertility rate to below the replacement level of fertility, which is at now 2.1 per woman, and, of course, the increases in the other populations that I mentioned before. Population projections indicate that the working age population should reach its maximum in 2020 and then decline thereafter. And you will understand why I'm focusing on this working age population with respect to the elderly and in contrast to the elderly. Mind you, we don't know how COVID has impacted on this because of lack of productivity last year, etc., or reduced productivity, I should say. And the statistics are still being analyzed now. You also have a feminization of the elderly population, President. And this brings to focus that you also have to have that gender, that very keen attention being paid to gender opportunities when you're dealing with our elderly population. and especially just to seek out equity in the resources that might be available. We see that women are generally having a lower socioeconomic status than men. However, a higher percentage of elderly females were retired with a pension compared to males. And more women are likely to be reporting that they are educated, especially at a university level. The PIOJ study in 2012 showed that there was a 69.1% of households with an elderly member that was headed by the elderly person, and of that, 54.3 were females, whereas 45.7 were males. In the household headed by the older person, data is definitely showing that it is predominantly female. Now, that is one comparison in terms of the feminization. But something that I found also interesting is the statistics from 1994 compared to now, 28 years ago. The elderly population has increased by over 53%. And that is the rate at which we are going, 53% in about 28 years. The portion of dependent elderly generally has increased by over 44%, with a preponderance of females largely due to their higher survival rate over men. Persons 60 and over are Jamaica's fastest growing age group, a similar pattern to the rest of the world except in Africa for their unique reasons. Now, Mr. President, why I went into this is that the aging population also presents economic opportunities. The increasing number of elderly offers an expanded customer base and new markets, as well as an enlargement of the pool of older workers available for employment. Based on the projected increases in older population in Jamaica, there is no doubt that older workers will increasingly become key players in the successful development of both public and private sector. Mr. President, these shifts in the age structure as well as other demographic changes have presented new opportunities for the furtherance of the country's development agenda. Given the population changes, work has been advanced to revise the 1995 National Population Policy. The revised policy will be the strategic framework for guiding population and development initiatives in 2030. And that policy is expected to facilitate the integration of the population dynamics into all aspects of development and planning, which are strategically aligned to Vision 2030. Now, another demographic to consider is the regional distribution of our elderly. Data from the PIJ indicates that even though the majority of the elderly population reside in rural areas, Jamaica is experiencing a move from the elderly, from rural areas into more urban centers. You know, and I cannot help but recognize that in these rural areas, a significant amount of these elderly individuals are in the farming sector or have been traditional farmers. And so the initiatives to enable their development could significantly improve the lives of the elderly persons in those communities. But the fact is that they're also moving now into more urban settings. And so it all goes back to the fact that we do need this piece of legislation as proposed by Senator Morris. To emphasize the point, we recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has also impacted in a unique way with the older population. It has shown just how badly things can go wrong when our human rights are not protected. The UN Convention, there's a proposed UN Convention on the rights for older persons coming out of the pandemic. And it recognized that older persons have been hit particularly hard by the virus because in itself there's a failure to protect their rights in response that led to unnecessary death, deteriorations in cognition, mental and physical health, unmet health and other support needs, increased poverty, discrimination, abuse, vilification, and stigmatization. Legislation that sees to the protection of the rights of older persons provides a clear baseline enshrined in law to better guide policies, laws, and services in the future. It would put solidarity and respect for everyone's dignity to the fore as common values that we need to uphold at all times. It will challenge community attitudes, behaviors, norms, and social constructions that keep us from living fairly and freely as equals when we are older, amplifying the voices of the older persons and helping to ensure that people, no matter what their age, can live their lives to the full. Mr. President, this is what I think we're seeking to do here in Jamaica. And so I cannot not recognize some of the measures that have been taken so far that we hope to build on. Because at the end of the day, foundation has been laid. This is a continuation of a process. And I must congratulate the National Council for Senior Citizens, where their motto of promoting healthy, active, and productive aging. And let me just put it here, because one of the issues that we have is that a lot of persons who are of this age group are not privy to the information that is relevant to them. A lot of persons don't realize that the eligibility to register with the National Council for the Senior Citizens is just being 60 years and older. That's it. And having a birth certificate, a voter ID, a form of ID, passport, TRN, and you can apply at any Ministry of Labour and Social Security office. And there are significant benefits to be had. A phone number for them, 906-9277. Right? I'm putting it out there because a lot of persons don't realize this. You have concessionary bus fares on JUTC buses, discounts from pharmacies and supermarkets, businesses with banks and other government agencies. You have home help services, visits by nurses, aides, and volunteers, assistance with medical care, errands currently available in Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. Catherine. Skills training. Training is provided in collaboration with various partners, including RADA, Jamaica 4-H, the SDC, skills professionals, financial institutions, the Jamaica Library Service, Ministry of Health and Wellness, and the Red Cross. You have the Meals on Wheels program, where you have daily home-delivered cooked meals to needy shut-ins, especially in the KSA. Monthly food packages, and of course, this was stepped up during the COVID pandemic. Medical supplies and mobility aids. The National Council for Senior Citizens also has a recognition of centenarians, persons 100 years and older, and actually that's May 20th of every year. So next week, they will be very actively recognizing the centenarians amongst our population. You have health and education programs, physical activity workshops at senior citizens and in their homes. And Mr. President, I cannot not emphasize the critical importance of exercise in the elderly. And exercise right across the board. It is a significant, it is not just about chronic lifestyle illnesses, but it is about enabling the holistic health of the individual. And especially in the elderly, it is significantly helpful for their health, but their social well-being. And whatever mechanisms we can do to encourage that, I would support. Healthy lifestyle workshops, training for caregivers and volunteers, health seminars, community health fairs, digital and financial literacy training, online banking, enabling elderly persons to do online banking, ATM use, point-of-sale services, smart devices, bill payments, heart and NSTA caregiver training, community information fairs, information seminars, and small group forums. These are all services that the National Council for Senior Citizens engages in on a regular basis. There are also social benefits currently being meted out for the seniors. The National Health Fund, JADEP, significantly helpful to our elderly population. The Social Pension Program, as it was mentioned earlier, 75 years and older. The PATH, as mentioned by Senator Morris, NIS and NI Gold. Concessionary fares on public transport, as I mentioned before. Poor relief, public assistance grant, and, of course, non-government feeding programs through churches and NGOs. So, Mr. President, there are many services, but again, I think that a lot of persons are not aware of how to access them. One or two other initiatives that they engage on that I particularly am hoping we will see an expansion of is the intergenerational programs, where you try to collaborate between the age groups, programs that are mutually beneficial. Volunteerism, homework programs, exercise programs, mentorship, those intergenerational programs, enabling using the young persons who are tech savvy to enable the tech awareness of the elderly. Income generating projects. One that came to my mind is utilizing what the elderly is especially known for, which is their experience and wisdom, and the memoirs that could be had, the historical reference that some of these individuals could provide. And so why not engage a cohort of writers in these programs to get some of these persons who have these wonderful stories and these wonderful experiences down on paper. You mentioned it earlier with Mr. Glutens and his orchid project and books. But the fact is that this is one way we can harness the wisdom of the past before we lose it. And so many programs are there, Mr. President. Senator Morris went into great detail about the national policy for senior citizens and the fact that Jamaica is a trailblazer in the establishment of such, regionally, etc., and that this came out of the Beijing conference that was, and the social summit that was held in Denmark in 1997 and subsequently 2011 and 2012. So I will not go into that in detail. I will repeat the 6 major policy goals that we're hoping. Increased participation of citizens in all spheres of society, improved income security and social protection coverage, adequate and supportive health and welfare systems for senior citizens, improved independence, security and safety for our senior citizens, enhanced family support systems and community solidarity from interaction with senior citizens, strengthened institutional and infrastructural networks for partnerships, collaboration, and governance. And of course, the 6 thematic areas, as was mentioned before, of social engagement and participation, social protection, income security and employment, health and wellness, physical environments, protection and safety, family integration, intergenerational transfers, and governance and capacity building. This is what we're hoping to pursue, Mr. President. But I would also want to highlight what comes to my table quite often, and that is, as was, I think, briefly mentioned by Senator Morris, the issue of elder abuse. And let me note that World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is observed on June 15, and it is, again, hosted by the National Council for Senior Citizens here. And let us recognize that elder abuse tends to occur where seniors live, and which is why it is sometimes difficult for them to speak up. Because it is oftentimes the same persons who are, in their way, trying to care for, but are frustrated. It's what we call caregiver burnout. That's the technical reference that we use for it. When you have a lack of understanding and a lack of patience oftentimes in dealing with someone who we culturally might recognize as being senile or them get old so them head a go. But it is really what we call Alzheimer's or different forms of dementia, or what we call pseudo-dementia. Pseudo-dementia is when someone is so depressed, usually in the older years, that the depression is so severe that it starts to affect the cognition. And so it presents as if it is dementia, but it is actually a depression. And if you solve the depression, you solve the dementia. But you, of course, have the real dementia that can occur. And I say this to say that the issues that I went back to when I started out with generativity versus stagnation, at that age, depression and anxiety are significantly prevalent because a lot of the lifestyles that were lived before, a lot of the people that were there before, the social community is gone. And they're left lonely, they're left to contemplate their mortality. And usually, if it is not one of a comfortable life, it can be quite devastating. And that in and of itself, if there's a caregiver present, can be burdensome to the caregiver also. So, you know, it is unfortunately by family members, grandchildren, spouses, and so the victim is oftentimes afraid to talk. It manifests in physical abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and of course, neglect. And so legislation currently that relates to this, but we might want to recognize, if they go the full extent, we might want to consider this in our deliberations as we proceed, Senator Morris. The Domestic Violence Act, where when an individual breaches a protection order and exploits the vulnerability of an elderly person, one can be fined $10,000 or up to 6 months in prison. $10,000 might not be enough of a punishment, something that we might want to consider. The Offenses Against the Persons Act, where the deterrence from violent acts of murder, assault, and other criminal offenses that this legislation anticipates is not directly providing for the elderly, and so might not carry as significant an effect. And the Sexual Offences Act, the elderly person who are usually victims of sexual abuse often have medical problems, and that may result in difficulties of communicating, confusion, or memory loss, all of which may interfere with the ability of the individual to report the abuse. This additional violation to the elderly with an underlying medical condition during sexual abuse should be taken into account, I think, if an Elderly Care and Protection Act is being pursued. The Maintenance Act, and welfare of parents and grandparents are protected. Every person who is not a minor has an obligation, to the extent that the person is capable of doing so, to maintain the person's parents and grandparents who are in need of such maintenance by reason of age, physical or mental infirmity, or disability. And this is one of the acts that I would imagine that we would be focusing on as we pursue, again, this agenda. Mr. President, one other demographic that I'd want to bring to our attention, and it's a kind of a manipulation of the demographic, age demographic ratio, the age dependency ratio. And this age dependency ratio takes into consideration the total number of dependents, that is, the children under 15 and the dependent elderly, which is 65 and over, relative to the work age population. In other words, it shows that the number of economically inactive people whom economically active people have to support. As the working age population increases relative to the dependent ages, the age dependency ratio will decrease. A decline in dependency presents a window of opportunity, known as a demographic dividend. And, Mr. President, we are in a phase where that working age population is actually increasing. So we actually have an opportunity of capitalizing on this dividend, and it is time sensitive. And leveraging the benefits, though, is not automatic, but depends on the implementation of appropriate social, economic, and environmental development policies, programs, and plans aimed at human capital development and job creation. As I said, Jamaica is currently in this favorable demographic position for production and growth. To this end, work is advanced to revise as I said, the 1995 National Population Policy, and in addition to other mechanisms, implementation of a revised policy that will enable Jamaica to achieve the positive advantages of the demographic dividend as one of the goals of the revised policies to effectively mobilize the dividend to facilitate sustainable development. Essentially, Mr. President, we have an opportunity to maximize on our working population and providing opportunities that our dependent population can benefit from. And if we put those mechanisms in place, that older age group in 2050 would be much less of a burden than they are now.
Mr. President, the Senator's time for speaking having expired, I propose that we extend her time for speaking sufficient for her to complete the presentation.
Thank you very much, Senator Bunting. Members should have heard the question. In favor? Against?
Thank you, President. Thank you, colleagues. So, yes, Mr. President, I also want to recognize that this maximizing of that age dependency dividend it's about having cash to care. And if at any time in life that is relevant, it is in that age group. And I have to recognize the fact that culturally, our population tends to depend. It's almost like the pension plan, other than a formal financial pension plan that few people actually engage in relative to the population. It's like the older age groups tend to plan based on the number of children they have and the support that they will get from these children as they get older, putting them in a somewhat of a subservient position at times, and again, predisposed to abuse. Another way that persons kind of secure their future is through housing and the home that they have, and the housing as an equity. And so I have to recognize our initiatives to provide accessible and affordable housing, with over 70,000 affordable housing solutions being rolled out by the present administration. The Prime Minister's low-income housing project is in tandem with the National Land Agency, and so we're seeing where provisions are being made to enable persons in their later years of having such equity. There is even move to regularize squatters. A lot of our elderly population fall in this category, and the moves by the squatter, establishing the National Squatter Survey, is to see that there's a national squatter management policy and implementation plan to see to the equitable development of these individuals. And so, Mr. President, these are practical ways that we can build on as we seek to protect our aging population. I will wrap up, Mr. President, by saying that the holistic approach to healthcare applies here as it would anywhere else. The physical health of our elderly people, programs to enhance exercise, the social health of our people, especially at that age, is tremendously beneficial when you can have an elderly person socially connected with their peers across the age groups, across the waters, as the case may be. And also, their spiritual health is especially important at this age. As I said, there's contemplation of one's mortality. There's contemplation of what you're leaving behind. And the development and the enhancement and the enablement of spiritual health pursuit is also significantly beneficial at that time. The glaring issues in mental health for the elderly is depression and loneliness. And as evidenced by just what we spoke of the glutens who passed away within days or weeks of each other, it does impact in a realistic way. The one last thing that I would like to bring to our attention, and I probably should have done it before when I mentioned about the feminization of the elderly, is the difference in the retirement age being 60 years for females and 65 years for males. That is what my research indicated. And I think that that is something that we might want to review and regularize. And even reflect on the fact that many of our 60 and 65-year-old individuals are still very productive. Still very productive. And I think that especially in fields like the judiciary, where the wisdom that comes with experience is one that the population can benefit from. In my own healthcare field, the wisdom that comes with experience that can be passed on, I think that it is something for us to really consider whether or not we want to hold steadfast to this. And so, Mr. President, with that, I will definitely say that I endorse the private member's motion tabled by Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, that it seeks to further the agenda of caring for yet another group of vulnerable people. And with that, I thank you.
Senator Hill.
Mr. President, I now ask that the debate on private members' motion be suspended until another sitting of the Senate.
Thank you very much. I support the motion for the suspension because I know that other members, and I am of the view, I have been informed that Senator Golden would want to make a contribution at a future time. So I would support it. But that's not good enough. Those in favor? Against? Senator Hill?
Mr. President, given that Senator Brown and the rest of us have agreed that there will be no more business to be conducted today, I ask that the Senate be suspended until a further sitting. I have been disturbed consistently by him, but Mr. President, I move the motion.
I think that Senator Longmore wanted to recognize on the adjournment, wanted to briefly recognize two developments. Senator Bunting, I had notified you, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the wordage kind of got me there. I just wanted to recognize, and not say just, because it's quite very important, Nurses' Day that was celebrated internationally and here in Jamaica yesterday under the theme, respect, support, and appreciate them. And especially at this time, Senator Bunting, more so than ever, I think our healthcare personnel generally, but especially our nurses, should be definitely respected, should be supported, and we can support our nurses by taking care of our own health. COVID is not over. As the Prime Minister said, we all know, Jamaicans know what to do to protect themselves. And I think one of the greatest ways that we can show support to our nurses is to ensure that we're reducing their burden at work. And of course, appreciate them. So even just going out and saying thank you, I will not be long. And I should also recognize that yesterday, the reason why it is on that day of the 12th of May is that it is Florence Nightingale's birthday. And so, of course, with our our significant connection with Lady Nightingale being of Jamaican heritage, we also celebrate it in another way. The other significant time period of national significance is, of course, Child's Month. And this year, Child's Month theme, Listen Up, Children's Voices Matter. I will not go into great detail as to the significance of this at this time with what we're seeing out there in terms of our children going back to school post-COVID and the challenges that we're being faced, not just as the children themselves, but those who care for our children. Listen Up, Children's Voices Matter is quite significant. Because when a child says something, especially something disturbing, it is not inherent for them to come up with this. They learned it or they were exposed to it. And so we must pay attention to it. There's a lot of stress going on in our society, and recognize that children will express it in different ways. So if you see a child saying something, behaving in a particular way, being a little bit more clingy, a little bit more, it is not a matter that they're having, they're being a little bit precocious or what. They may just need your attention. So especially now at this time and going forward, listen to them, pay attention, and let their voice be heard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Longmore. Senator Morris? Notice how I make a distinction between you and Senator Morris. You are Senator Morris. He is Morris. It's a tonal thing.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me join with my colleague in acknowledging our nation's nurses as we celebrated Nurses Day yesterday. And I thought the theme was quite fittingly appropriate, support and acknowledge our nurses, because we see how throughout the pandemic they've played such a significant role in really holding up the core of our healthcare system and ensuring that Jamaicans are offered quality service. And so this morning in this place, I think it is important that we lift our hats to them, because many of them have been working in subpar conditions. Many of them have left their families for long hours without end. Many of them are going on the bare minimum. And so this morning I want to offer my commendations for the good work that they do. And Mr. President, while we offer them, our commendations, it cannot be lost on us that we have to ensure that our nurses are given the resources and the compensation, yes, that they deserve for a job well done. And many of them, we have to acknowledge that many of them have been going beyond the call of duty, not just operating in the hospital space, but at times even offering their contributions and their support to the communities in which they live. My grandmother was a nurse, Sister Telly, in Westmoreland, and many times she would take me out in Westmoreland to visit the senior citizens, take their blood pressure and that kind of thing. And so many of our nurses they're going that extra mile, and we have to recognize and commend them. I also want to add my remarks on Child's Month. The theme, when I looked at it, Listen Up, Children's Voices Matter, it brought me back to the old adage of children should be seen and not heard. And I reflected on it and I said, wow, times are changing, because our children are certainly asserting their voices, and they're ensuring that all of us recognize that they have something to say. And so it's imperative
that no more than ever we listen to our children's needs, our children's wants, our children's aspirations, and also listen to the challenges that they're facing. Senator Longmore, you outlined some of those challenges, challenges with education, challenges with violence. We see even a new challenge, with them existing in the cyberspace. And so these are things that we have to consider as we seek to create a more comfortable and safe environment for Jamaican children. One thing that isn't lost on me, though, is the fact that while there's so many challenges, our children inspire hope. They've been so resilient. They've been through a lot, and I think many of them have come out shining. But despite that, many of them are still being left behind. And we can look at communities such as children with disabilities. We can look at communities like children in state care, and we recognize that there is so much more to be done. And so I want to use this time to also make a call and to remind us that we have to pay special attention, especially to our children in the education system who are existing with learning disabilities. Many of them are not being catered to. And so we have to review how we deal with that and ensure that no child is left behind. As I close, Mr. President, I want to make a special appeal because I think I've said it in this place before that it still takes a village. It still takes a village to ensure that our children have safe spaces to exist in. It still takes a village to ensure that our children feel heard. And so I want to remind the general public that there's a 211 hotline. There's a 211 hotline for children who are being abused, for children who are not in school. And I want every member of the Jamaican community to use Child's Month as a reminder that we have to play a collective role in looking out for children. And so don't just let it be a community whisper if something is happening to a child. Report, report, report. The onus is on all of us as leaders, all of us teachers, community leaders, nurses, doctor, policeman, everybody, to ensure that we play our part in really creating a future for our children that we can be proud of. Mr. President, I want to wish the public, to the children, I wish they had stayed, Happy Child's Month. We see you, we hear you, we love you, we appreciate you, and we're here to support you.
Just before you move for the suspension of you did already, eh? I just want to make a special appeal. The last occasion when we had a joint sitting when President Kagame was here, I must say that the turnout from the Senate was not particularly robust. I believe we have a joint sitting this Tuesday at 10 a.m. So it would be good if you all could make a special effort to be available. Pardon? 10 a.m. 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Anybody didn't get the notification? It should have gone out anyway. So it's 10 a.m. this Tuesday is a joint sitting for the President of the Republic of India. So I think that we can try and make an effort to be here. Please. Thank you very much. You see, I'm always being corrected. It is a special meeting of the House to which the Senate is being invited. It's not a joint sitting. Thank you, Ms. Curtis. Minister? you know that my wife gave me ginkgo biloba to take because she said it aid my memory, but I can't remember to take the tablet. Go on, Minister.
Mr. President, with those two closing commendations from our senators, there's no other business to be attended to today. So I ask the Senate be suspended until the a new date.
Yes, the question is the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favor? Against?
Thank you.